Welcome to the NDIS Property Australia podcast. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Welcome back to another episode. Today we're here with Rob, Maxwell and Minh from the office, and we'll be discussing land supply and land acquisition.
Thanks for that, Erin. Rob, welcome back.
Thanks, Minh. Good to be here.
Our last episode, I think number 4, when we were here in Melbourne last month, a lot of the listeners really loved our summary of the Melbourne market with regards to how the SDA is going. And I think backed by popular demand, we're going to talk more about the land supply situation and how to acquire land, Rob.
Okay, great.
How are things going in the land side of things in Melbourne at the moment?
Land for new builds is extremely tight in terms of supply. Over the last 2 or 3 years, with all the government incentives for new homes to be built for both homeowners and investors, there's been a lot of sales of land that's come onto the market. Over the last 12 months, the amount of new land being developed has rapidly dwindled to the point where it is now extremely difficult to find appropriate blocks for any build in Melbourne. And the ones that are available for sale are generally looking at a settlement and a titling timeframe of between 12 to 18 months. So it's certainly got tight in supply. The demand is still there and probably going to grow again over the next 12 to 18 months, which is one reason why pricing has also gone up a lot over the last 12 months. But it is very difficult to find appropriate land to build on.
So when you say appropriate land, are you talking about appropriate land for normal resi or appropriate land for SDA?
Bit of both. What I'm finding over the last few months in looking for land for SDA builds is that the land that is for sale and available tends to be either an unusual shape or it's got a lot of fall on it, anywhere up to a metre in fall. And as your listeners will probably know, with SDA, it is ideal for flat blocks to be used to build these houses. Anything up to 400 millimetres is a guide for the build. When you think about people in the wheelchairs, etc., you can't have hilly sites. The other issue we're finding as well with the builders trying to become more efficient in Melbourne with both normal builds and SDA builds, they only want to build on very generic, basic sites that are flat, where they can have no issues at all, building as quickly as possible and just doing a number of these houses. They're not particularly interested at the minute in building on unusual or difficult sites, unfortunately. So that makes an added difficulty going forward.
Some of the builders are also very picky with going to infill areas, or also known as brownfield, and preferring the greenfield areas, which is the new land estates, isn't it?
Correct, because it's much easier. It's quicker. You don't need to get the same level of permits, and you don't have issues with traffic. You don't have issues with neighbours who've already got their homes built in terms of getting the build done going forward.
So just on that, Rob, can you explain the challenges of having an infill block which has power lines above and also traffic management issues? Please explain to our listeners why that's a negative.
Yeah, when we're talking an infill site, we're talking an existing area that has got 95 to 99% of the blocks that are already been built on, and it might be 10, 20, 30 years old. So it's an existing area where you have the odd block come up or the odd site that they turn into townhouses and apartments. The problems are, one, traffic management. You first of all need a lot of red tape to go through with councils to get the appropriate approvals to be able to build in the first place.
Yeah.
Traffic management, you want to steer clear of main roads or very busy roads because you're looking at anywhere up to $50,000 just in cost to have the sign, the stop-go sign people over a site. It's unbelievably expensive. Then if you've got the older areas that in Melbourne people will know where the power lines are above the ground, versus the new estates all tend to have the power lines under the ground, so you don't see them anymore.
Yep.
If you're doing a manufactured SDA build where they're trucking in the pods, they can't do that with power lines in the way, so that becomes an added difficulty.
Yep.
And then if you've got houses all around the site, which you would in an infill site, you've got issues with neighbours, sound. You've also got site issues, privacy that you have to take into account when you're building these homes. So it just makes it a significantly longer process. You're talking anywhere from 3 to 6 months additional time just to set up, to organise the build and get the appropriate permits.
Plus the demolition.
And the costs associated with that. You've got the issues with neighbours around sound and sight, as we said. So builders in this sector have decided, because it's become so competitive to build in Melbourne and the profit margins are reduced, they are only interested in building on very simple, easy sites where they can build as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And there are limitations with those scenarios too, Rob, because if you're building in those outer areas in those land estates, the infrastructure and amenities around the area may not be up to speed yet, correct?
Correct. Although the one advantage you've got if you're looking at an estate that's reasonably large and is backed by a reasonably big land developer is usually they'll either be starting to build a shopping centre, and it will usually be close to public transport because that's what makes it more attractive to turn into an estate in the first place. So even though it may not have the amenities now, the likelihood is that most of these estates within the first 12 or 18 months will be in a position where they would have the amenities that are suitable for SDA.
Yeah.
So you have to look forward.
Gotcha. Speaking of large land estates, those big boys like Stocklands and Lendlease, they tend to have restrictions of, well, not restrictions, but guidelines of trying to get 60, 70% of owner-occupiers in those estates instead of investors, correct?
Correct. Ideally, most land developments would prefer more owner-occupiers than investors.
And why is that, Rob?
The perception and, to a degree, the actual statistics show that the value of the properties in the areas will be better if you've got owner-occupiers, because as a general rule, an owner-occupier is going to have more pride in the house and look after the house and the surrounds better than an investor will.
Yes.
You're also likely to have less cars at the front and on the street when it's an owner-occupier. If it's an investor, you could have 4 or 5 people in the one house with 4 or 5 cars. So generally, you want to invest in an estate that has got at least 50 to 60% owner-occupiers.
That's if you can get in.
Correct.
So there is the challenge as well. So if you are an investor who wants to build an SDA property in a new estate, it's going to be challenging to actually get on the waiting list and actually succeed in getting the EOI in to buy a block of land.
Yes, and as you know, there's restrictions on the amount that you can actually do in any estate with SDA anyway, so it's already limited. And finding the investors is not the hard part. It is now a case of finding the land and the appropriate builder that's prepared to build on that land.
I think finding the builder is just as hard as finding the land right now.
Correct, and you also have the added issue, and that's what we do, and we do the due diligence. You have to be very careful with who the builder is right at the minute because of all the economic issues around builders in Australia and supply chains. You want to be confident that you've got a builder that's going to be around in the next 5 or 10 years.
There's been rumour of a very large builder in Australia, and I won't mention any names because it's not public yet, but it's one of Australia's top builders. And rumour is that they're into administration unofficially and will be officially in administration in the next 3 or 4 weeks' time. And the implications of that happening is huge, isn't it, Rob?
Potentially, yes. There are a number of builders in difficulty in Melbourne, and the banks are getting a lot more restrictive with their lending. Hopefully they'll all get through it.
Yep.
But the builders we use, we've done the due diligence and we're very confident that they are going to be fine over the next 12 to 18 months at the very minimum.
Well, let's not get too much detail about builders. Today we'll talk about land acquisition. So, Rob, what are the different examples of acquiring land in the marketplace for an investor if they were keen on looking at SDA?
As we've mentioned, buying a block in a new estate has been the traditional way of doing this, but it's become extremely hard, and you are going to be looking at a wait probably between 12 and 18 months. You can do the knockdown rebuilds that we've discussed.
Yes.
Again, possible in those infill areas, and you have to allow another 6 to 12 months for that. You could also, if you do have the financial funds, look at doing small developments yourself. You might buy a bigger block and then subdivide it and build 2 or 3 of these type of homes.
So just to clarify, I mean, we don't want to scare anyone off, but if you buy a big house, an old house on a big block, you get the approval by the council to knock it down, demolition, subdivide it, 2 blocks of land is next. That is a development in its own right, yeah?
Correct. And that is possible, and a lot of people have been doing that over the last few years in Melbourne for traditional sites, and it could be done for SDA as well.
So you might get a 25 metre wide frontage or 20 metre wide frontage block, right? Knock the old house down, subdivide it into 2 blocks, 10 metre wide frontage each, sell one off, cash out, pay off down the debt, and then build your preferred house, whatever that is, normal SDA or normal house, or an SDA house on that block, and then go from there.
Correct, you could do that. You just would need significant funds in order to be able to do that.
Yes.
And then the other opportunity is to potentially pool your funds with others of like-minded that are looking to do an SDA property through a syndicate, which we could potentially help with, where we look at bigger developments going forward.
That's more of a difficult extreme scenario, but I think what people think in their minds with land development is, if I have enough money, Rob, I'll just go buy a large site somewhere and then subdivide it into 4 blocks. That's probably more of a sophisticated purchaser who has $2-3 million in the bank to do that, buy a block and subdivide it. Then they'll sell the blocks off one by one and get cash out and move on from there. So that's probably the prelim for the next topic, which is what you just mentioned, the pool syndicate. So, Rob, are you saying that if I had 4 or 5 friends with a couple $100,000 each, we can pull it together and buy a larger site and develop it up, split it in half or whatever? Is that right?
Yes, and another option for investors that do have a little bit more
risk, I guess.
Risk and cash up front is that there is opportunities popping up in Melbourne where landowners in these outer areas where the land estates are all currently going up and now looking to cash in on their farms. Some of these that are available for purchase already have DA development approval. They're just looking for a group to come in to buy the house and then develop it to become a land estates. And for instance, there's an opportunity at the minute that's 66 blocks of land.
It's one site?
One site that can be turned into 66 blocks of land.
It's been DA'd
in
or
Melbourne,
not?
Currently with DA approval.
Yes.
In an existing growth area with great facilities right next to a train station, got a big shopping centre across the road.
Yes.
That could be purchased by a company that manages it all the way through to the end product.
Yes.
So we have relationships with all of those experts in construction that can do this.
So that would be a project manager and a development funder.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, so we have that in place. We've got arrangements with one of the biggest real estate companies in Australia that has a land acquisitions business that are getting these opportunities presented to them. It just needs investors to put in the initial funds for this, which could be done through a syndicate.
Yes.
With clients who are looking for an SDA property, where they put in the $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 up front for a year. That then could be turned into giving them access to blocks once they're created, 12 months later, that they'd be able to purchase with priority ranking and build the SDA homes at that stage. And they'd also get incentives through discounts to be able to do that. So that is a very attractive option to consider, particularly as it's only an extra 12 months and where they get interest on their funding anyway. Compared to the option of waiting 12 months just for the block to settle anyway. Yeah.
I guess that kind of approach, Rob, is very, how would you say, smarter in producing the land from scratch. So why compete with everyone else for land and wait that long when you find like-minded individuals, investors, to go into a unit trust? So you say syndicate, well, I say unit trust.
Correct. That's
company.
The structure that it'd be used.
And they buy the land and develop it and cut it up and split, move on. It's a year and a half turnaround time. If you have a block of land that big and DA approved already with the project manager and the funding in place, all you need is seed capital, and that's done within 12 months, basically, if that's the case.
12 to 18 months, yes.
It's
so
all-
at the minute, as we know, we can't buy the land. It's not available, so you have to go and create it.
Yeah.
And this is the way to create it.
Whether it's 66 blocks or 6 blocks, it's the same time frame to do it, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So these opportunities are now starting to pop up all over Melbourne because people will know that land prices have gone up a lot in the last 2 or 3 years with COVID.
Yeah.
So farmers are starting to look at cashing in on their block that they may have owned for 30 or 40 years, or it may have been in the family forever.
Yep.
But they don't want to do the developments themselves. They're not interested, don't have the skills, don't have the time or the knowledge.
Yep.
So they're looking to cash out. And this is how the big operators that you mentioned earlier, Stockland, Lendlease,
Yes.
Delphin, etc., they're constantly on the lookout. But the advantage that a smaller developer might have, or a group of developers, is that a lot of these landowners don't want to deal and sell to the big land developers.
Why is that?
I think they want to deal with a smaller group that they just identify with a little bit more, and they're a little bit more skeptical and wary of the bigger developers.
Yes.
And that is a trend.
Okay. Well, the mum and dad landowners seemed a little bit intimidated by the big boys who bully them around with undercutting the land price and trying to squeeze them out and everything. Yeah.
Correct.
And they offer difficult terms as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're prepared to, as I said, offer a reasonable price and you've got the development approval in place, it can be a very profitable strategy because land is still continuing to go up.
Yes.
Now, it may plateau for the next 12 months or 18 months, but as we know from our previous episode, land is a hard asset that in the current economic times that we're in, there isn't a lot of better investment options out there and safer options for your money.
I don't think there's ever been a case in the last 20, 30, 40 years where land market has crashed. I don't think so.
No, during the GFC, the commercial market did crash, but the residential never did.
Yeah.
It sort of paused for that year, but it certainly didn't get hit.
Yeah, but land is different from an actual residential property, commercial property. Land is just
correct.
a constant asset. Yeah.
Yeah. And the advantage is that because you're not beholden completely to the banks for funding, if you've got seed capital investors that put in a fair amount of the value of the land, you've got more control and there's less risk of a bank coming in and causing difficulty down the track.
Okay. Well, wonderful. That's a great option to consider. So as in summary, we have going on the waiting list for land developers to buy the land if you can get in. 2, knock-down rebuild of an old house on a block of land. 3, buying a larger piece of land and, again, knocking down and subdividing the block to be two blocks or whatever. 4 is buying a large parcel of land and subdividing the site itself to do 3 or 4 or 5 blocks yourself personally if you have a lot of money. Or 5, going to a pool of people to do it together to do a larger site. At a fraction of the capital, yeah. So they're the 5 scenarios that are on the table as options for people to consider to look at land acquisition in this current market, whether you are looking at as an NDIS property or a normal residential property. Yeah, they're the options.
That's true.
Rob, any final words of advice for our listeners about getting into the land market or for the new build market for land?
I guess if you are just looking to take the traditional approach of buying a house and land through either NDIS Property Australia or someone else, you first are going to have to accept the decision is that, yes, I want to invest in this particular investment, and then maybe wait for an appropriate block to come up that will be offered to you, and then you'll have to act reasonably quickly in the current market because these blocks are literally lasting 1 or 2 days.
What are the tough terms that these land developers and land agents are imposing when they release the land?
They will want a small financial commitment straight away in order to put the block on hold. That might be $1,000 or $2,000
Yes.
or $5,000.
Yes.
So they won't just put a block on hold and give you a week to make your decision anymore. They want you to actually physically commit cash
And sign.
That's one, and also in some cases they want to know that your finance is solid and strong.
A finance letter.
Yes.
Broker letter. A broker comfort letter, yes. Yeah.
And they can afford to do that because there's far more buyers now than there are blocks available.
Yeah. Okay, I think that covers it. I think we're good. Thank you very much, Rob. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure that you are subscribed and following us so that you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this episode with those that can benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.